You wake up, and before you've even spoken a single word, something has already made several decisions about your day. The first thing you see on your phone wasn't chosen by you. The song that starts playing in your headphones wasn't an accident. The route your map suggests, the news that catches your attention, the videos that quietly pull you in for another hour, they all arrived because something invisible predicted that you would want them. And what's unsettling isn't that it guessed. It's how often it was right. Maybe you felt it without knowing how to describe it. That strange sensation that your attention no longer entirely belongs to you. That your opinions sometimes seem to appear before you've had the chance to think them through. That your desires feel increasingly familiar, almost as if someone, or something, has rehearsed them long before they entered your mind. The unsettling part isn't that machines are becoming more intelligent. It's that we're becoming more predictable. For thousands of years, people searched the heavens for guidance. They looked toward priests, kings, philosophers, prophets, and sacred texts, hoping someone could answer the questions that haunted every generation. Who am I? What should I do? What makes a meaningful life? Every civilization created its own language for these mysteries. Different gods, different rituals, different stories. Yet beneath all those differences was the same assumption. Somewhere beyond ordinary human understanding existed a higher source of wisdom. Now, for the first time in history, something entirely different is beginning to occupy that space. Not because it promises salvation, not because it asks for worship, but because it consistently knows us better than we know ourselves. When historian Yuval Noah Harari warned that the religion of the future will have no God, it will have algorithms, many people dismissed it as another provocative prediction. A clever phrase designed to spark headlines. But beneath those words lies a question so unsettling that most of us instinctively avoid looking at it. What if belief itself is changing? Not what we believe, but how we believe. Every age creates its own invisible authority. Ancient tribes trusted the stars. Medieval kingdoms trusted divine revelation. The modern world placed enormous faith in science, institutions, and reason. Each transformation felt revolutionary, yet none erased humanity's deepest instinct. The desire to surrender uncertainty to something that appears wiser than ourselves. Maybe that's what has always made belief so powerful. Not certainty, relief. Because making decisions is exhausting. Every choice carries risk. Every mistake leaves regret. Every uncertain future whispers that perhaps someone else knows better. And when life becomes overwhelmingly complex, the temptation to outsource judgment becomes almost irresistible. Have you ever opened a streaming app with no idea what to watch, only to pick the first recommendation because deciding felt like work? Or searched for a restaurant, scrolling endlessly until the highest rated option became your choice? Not because it inspired you, but because thousands of strangers seemed more trustworthy than your own instinct? These moments feel insignificant, but history teaches us that civilizations rarely transform through dramatic revolutions alone. They change through habits, tiny ones. Repeated millions of times, long before written history, our ancestors survived because they learned to trust collective knowledge. One hunter alone might miss danger hiding in the grass. An entire tribe rarely did. Evolution rewarded those who listened to the group. Over thousands of generations, our brains became remarkably efficient at recognizing authority and following reliable patterns. This wasn't weakness. It was survival. The individual who ignored every warning rarely lived long enough to pass on that rebellious spirit. Even today, much of what we call independent thinking is quietly shaped by invisible social influence. Psychologists have shown that people often change their answers to obvious questions simply because everyone else in the room appears confident. We like to imagine ourselves as fiercely autonomous, yet beneath the surface, our minds are deeply social. We absorb signals, imitate behaviors, and seek reassurance from the crowd long before we're aware of doing it. Algorithms didn't invent this tendency. They discovered it, and then they learned how to refine it. Every click, every pause, every hesitation, every late-night search becomes a fragment of a portrait that's constantly being updated. Unlike another person, an algorithm never gets tired. It doesn't forget. It doesn't become distracted. It simply watches patterns accumulate until prediction becomes astonishingly accurate. It knows which headlines make you anxious, which songs soften your mood, which faces hold your attention for a fraction of a second longer, which fears keep you awake, which dreams keep you scrolling. At first, this feels convenient. Eventually, it becomes intimate. Then, almost without noticing, it begins to feel normal. History offers an eerie parallel. Thousands of years ago, priests occupied a unique position in society because they possessed information unavailable to ordinary people. They understood sacred rituals, interpreted celestial events, preserved written language, and acted as intermediaries between humanity and forces people believed they couldn't access directly. Their authority wasn't based solely on power, it rested on exclusive knowledge. Knowledge has always been power, but today's knowledge is different. Instead of interpreting the movement of planets, algorithms interpret the movement of your thumb across a screen. Instead of recording sacred confessions, they quietly record digital ones. Every purchase, every search, every hesitation before deleting a message. Every photo you almost posted but didn't. If someone from the ancient world witnessed this, they might not describe it as technology. They might describe it as omniscience. And here's where the story becomes deeply personal. Because the greatest illusion isn't that algorithms are controlling us. It's that they never need to. Real influence doesn't force. It persuades. Think about how rarely you're ordered to do anything online. Instead, you're gently nudged. Another recommendation appears. Another notification arrives. Another perfectly timed suggestion slips into your attention at precisely the moment your defenses are lowest. No one commands. Yet millions comply. Behavioral psychologists have spent decades uncovering how remarkably sensitive humans are to subtle environmental cues. Change the order of choices and decisions change. Alter the color of a button and millions more people click it. Rearrange information and entire public opinions begin shifting without anyone realizing why. Our minds don't simply respond to reality. They respond to how reality is presented. Technology didn't create this vulnerability. It industrialized it. For centuries, philosophers argued about free will. Were human beings truly making independent choices? Or were invisible forces already shaping every decision? Religion pointed toward divine plans. Biology pointed toward instinct. Society pointed toward culture. Now algorithms introduce an unsettling new possibility. What if your future behavior can be predicted? Not perfectly, but accurately enough to influence it before you've consciously decided. The question feels almost offensive because it challenges something we desperately want to protect. The belief that our inner world belongs exclusively to us. Yet neuroscience paints a surprisingly complicated picture. Researchers studying decision-making have repeatedly found that the brain often begins preparing actions before conscious awareness catches up. By the time we experience the feeling of, "I decided," countless unconscious processes have already been unfolding beneath the surface. Consciousness, it seems, is sometimes less like a commander giving orders and more like a narrator explaining events already in motion. That doesn't mean free will is an illusion. But it does mean we're far less transparent to ourselves than we'd like to believe. Algorithms don't need to understand your soul. They only need to understand your patterns. And patterns, unlike personalities, are measurable. This realization changes something fundamental. For centuries, wisdom meant looking inward. From the temples of ancient Greece to Buddhist monasteries hidden in mountain ranges, the greatest teachers insisted that self-knowledge was the beginning of freedom. Know thyself wasn't merely a philosophical slogan. It was considered one of the highest human achievements. Today something extraordinary has happened. Many people know their recommendation feed better than they know themselves. They trust the playlist to discover their taste. They trust search engines to answer questions they haven't fully formed. They trust navigation systems to guide roads they've traveled for years. One by one, small acts of self-reliance quietly dissolve. Not because anyone demanded they disappear, but because convenience feels so much easier than conscious effort. And convenience has always carried a hidden price. Every civilization that mastered comfort eventually faced a difficult question. What happens when the tools designed to serve us begin shaping the very people we become? The Romans built roads that united an empire. But those same roads accelerated conquest, centralized power, and reshaped entire cultures. The printing press liberated knowledge while also spreading propaganda on an unprecedented scale. Television connected millions while quietly redefining politics, entertainment, and public imagination. Every revolutionary technology gave humanity something extraordinary and asked for something in return. Artificial intelligence may become the first technology that doesn't merely extend human abilities. It may begin replacing the process through which those abilities are formed. That's a difference history has never encountered before. Because once a machine consistently tells you what to read, what to buy, who to date, what to believe, where to work, and even how to feel, it stops functioning as a simple tool. It starts becoming an interpreter of reality itself. And perhaps that's exactly what every religion has always been. Not merely a set of beliefs, but a framework that quietly tells people what is true, what matters, and who they are. The question isn't whether algorithms will replace God. The deeper question is far more uncomfortable. When the voice you trust most no longer comes from your own reflection, but from a system trained to predict your every move. Who, exactly, is living your life? That question lingers because it reaches far beyond technology. It reaches into the oldest struggle human beings have ever faced. The battle between certainty and freedom. Freedom sounds beautiful until you're forced to carry its weight. Every generation has searched for something that could reduce uncertainty. Kings promised order, religions promised meaning, economists promised prosperity, scientists promised progress. None of them eliminated doubt, but they gave people a framework sturdy enough to stand on. Algorithms offer something even more seductive. They don't ask you to believe first. They simply work. They recommend the song you didn't know you needed. They predict the product you were about to buy. They finish your sentences, organize your calendar, suggest your next vacation, and increasingly, write your emails, answer your questions, and even comfort your loneliness. Unlike ancient prophets, they don't rely on faith. They rely on data. And in a culture that has learned to worship efficiency, results often matter more than mystery. This is where Harari's warning becomes less about computers and more about human nature. The danger isn't that artificial intelligence will suddenly declare itself a god. Machines have no desire for worship. The danger is that we may gradually stop exercising the very abilities that once defined us, because an algorithm performs them faster, more accurately, and with far less effort. History suggests that humans rarely abandon old habits overnight. We simply become less practiced at them. There was a time when nearly everyone memorized phone numbers. Today, most people struggle to remember even a handful because their devices remember for them. There was a time when navigating a city required observation, landmarks, and a mental map built over years of experience. Now many drivers obediently follow a calm digital voice through neighborhoods they've lived in for decades. Mirror didn't disappear. Navigation didn't vanish. But the muscles behind them quietly weakened. The same process may now be happening with judgment itself. Have you ever noticed how quickly people ask an AI for advice before sitting alone with their own thoughts? Sometimes the question isn't especially difficult. It's simply uncomfortable. Instead of wrestling with uncertainty, we ask for an answer that feels immediate, confident, and objective. The irony is almost poetic. The more intelligent our tools become, the less comfortable we seem to be with the slow, messy process of thinking. Psychologists often describe the brain as an energy-saving machine. Thinking deeply requires enormous mental effort. Every difficult decision consumes attention, emotional resources, and time. That's why our minds rely so heavily on shortcuts. We create habits, we build routines, we follow familiar paths because they allow us to conserve energy for moments that truly demand it. For most of human history, these shortcuts were adaptive. They helped us survive. Today, they can quietly become vulnerabilities because algorithms are built to understand those shortcuts better than we do. Every hesitation becomes a clue. Every repeated behavior strengthens a prediction. Every emotional reaction improves the next recommendation. Over time, your digital profile begins to resemble something strangely intimate, not because it understands your deepest dreams, but because it understands the habits that reveal them. Carl Jung believed that much of human life unfolds beneath conscious awareness. Hidden motives, forgotten experiences, unacknowledged fears. They shape our choices long before reason constructs a story about why we acted. To become whole, Jung argued, a person must confront these unseen forces instead of allowing them to operate unnoticed. Now consider the strange world we're entering. What happens when an algorithm recognizes your unconscious patterns before you do? Not because it understands your childhood, not because it grasps your emotions, but because statistical patterns often reveal what introspection misses. It notices that every Sunday evening you search for new careers, that after reading certain news stories, you're more likely to shop impulsively, that loneliness changes your music, your purchases, even the hours you remain awake. It sees correlations invisible to your own awareness. That realization is both extraordinary and unsettling, because self-knowledge was once considered an inner journey. Now parts of it are becoming computational. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once warned that people often seek comforting illusions instead of difficult truths. He believed that genuine freedom demanded confronting uncertainty without clinging to convenient stories. That process was painful. It required courage. Technology offers a fascinating alternative. Instead of confronting uncertainty, it increasingly predicts it. Instead of asking who you want to become, it estimates who you're likely to become based on who you've already been. Those are not the same thing. Prediction looks backward. Transformation looks forward. Human beings have always possessed an extraordinary capacity to surprise themselves. The recovering addict who rebuilds a life. The quiet child who becomes a courageous leader. The exhausted worker who suddenly discovers a calling that changes everything. None of these stories make sense if identity is nothing more than accumulated data. And yet, Modern systems often operate as though the future is simply an extension of the past. That assumption carries enormous consequences, because the moment society begins treating probability as destiny, possibility begins shrinking. You see traces of it everywhere. Credit scores estimate financial behavior. Hiring software predicts job performance. Recommendation engines decide which creators become visible and which disappear into obscurity. Dating apps rank compatibility before two strangers have shared a single conversation. None of these systems claim perfection, but together they create something unprecedented. A world increasingly filtered through prediction. There's a quiet psychological shift that happens when people trust predictions more than experience. Eventually, they stop exploring. Why wander through a bookstore when an algorithm already knows which title you'll probably enjoy? Why listen to an unfamiliar musician when your personalized playlist rarely disappoints? Why challenge your beliefs when every platform has learned exactly which opinions keep your attention longest? Without realizing it, curiosity slowly transforms into confirmation. And confirmation feels incredibly comfortable. Neuroscience offers an explanation for why. The human brain rewards familiarity. When our expectations are confirmed, we experience a subtle sense of cognitive ease. The world feels coherent, predictable. Safe novelty, by contrast, demands effort. It forces the brain to revise existing models of reality. That's why genuinely changing your mind can feel emotionally exhausting, even when the evidence is compelling. Algorithms understand this dynamic remarkably well. Systems optimized for engagement often learn that people remain longer when they're shown content that reinforces existing identities instead of challenging them. Not because someone designed them to divide society, but because certainty captures attention. Doubt encourages people to leave. The consequences extend far beyond politics. Think about your own life. How often do your feeds introduce ideas that genuinely unsettle your worldview? How often do they expose you to perspectives you didn't already expect? More often than not, they become mirrors. And mirrors are comforting. Until they become prisons. Marcus Aurelius spent years reminding himself that the greatest battles weren't fought against external enemies, but against the impulses within his own mind. The Stoics believed wisdom required constant self-examination because the mind naturally drifted toward illusion, impulse, and emotional reactivity. That discipline required silence. We're far distant from distraction. Now compare that ancient practice to modern digital life. The average moment of boredom rarely lasts more than a few seconds before a screen appears. Waiting in line becomes scrolling. Eating alone becomes streaming. Walking becomes listening. Even grief often competes with notifications. Our ancestors feared isolation. We seem to fear stillness, because stillness leaves us alone with ourselves. And perhaps that's the one place no algorithm can comfortably follow. Not yet. Despite everything artificial intelligence can calculate, there remains an aspect of human experience that refuses easy measurement. Wonder. The moment you stare at the night sky and suddenly feel both insignificant and deeply connected. The strange peace that arrives during an unexpected conversation with a stranger. The decision to forgive someone, even when logic argues against it. The courage to begin again, after every prediction says you should fail. No database can fully explain why these moments happen. No equation can completely capture love, sacrifice, awe, or the quiet transformation that occurs when someone finally sees themselves honestly. Data can describe behavior. It cannot fully contain meaning. And that distinction may become one of the defining questions of this century. If intelligence continues advancing at breathtaking speed, what remains uniquely human? Is it creativity? Machines now paint, commercial music, write poetry, generate films. Is it knowledge? Machines retrieve information in seconds. Is it strategy? They outperform grandmasters in games once considered the pinnacle of human thought. Or is it something far more fragile? The ability to consciously choose who we become despite every pattern that came before. Because perhaps freedom was never about making random decisions. Perhaps freedom is noticing the invisible forces shaping your life and deciding even briefly not to obey them. That single act of awareness may become more valuable than any technological breakthrough humanity has ever invented. And if that's true, then the future won't simply be a contest between humans and machines. It will become a contest between unconscious living and conscious attention. The outcome of that struggle won't be decided inside the laboratory. It will be decided quietly, inside millions of ordinary minds, including yours. And maybe that's the most important realization of all. The future isn't arriving all at once. It isn't waiting for some dramatic moment when machines suddenly become conscious, or when humanity wakes up to discover that everything has changed overnight. The future arrives one ordinary decision at a time, one notification, one recommendation, one shortcut. One small moment when convenience quietly replaces awareness. The strange thing is that most revolutions don't announce themselves. When historians look back, they often describe turning points as though people recognized them while they were happening. But they rarely did. The citizens of ancient Rome didn't wake up one morning knowing they were witnessing the slow decline of an empire. The people living through the invention of the printing press couldn't fully imagine that Europe would never think the same way again. Even the early years of the internet felt less like a revolution than a novelty. A faster way to send emails, find information, and connect with friends. Only later did people realize they had crossed a threshold they could never return from. Perhaps we're standing at another one now. Not because artificial intelligence is becoming more capable, but because we are becoming more willing to let it think on our behalf. There is a subtle difference between using intelligence and outsourcing wisdom. One helps you move faster, the other quietly changes who is doing the moving. Buddhist philosophy has long suggested that suffering begins when we stop seeing reality clearly. The mind clings to habits, stories, desires, and fears until they become so familiar that we mistake them for truth. Liberation doesn't come from acquiring more information. It comes from noticing the machinery of the mind itself. That idea feels remarkably modern, because today, our greatest challenge may not be distinguishing truth from lies. It may be distinguishing our own thoughts from the countless suggestions that surround them. When was the last time you held an opinion that wasn't reinforced by a headline, a social media feed, a podcast, or an algorithm that had already learned what would keep your attention? When was the last time you sat with a difficult question without immediately searching for an answer? Those moments have become increasingly rare, not because we're less intelligent, but because answers have become infinitely cheaper than reflection. And reflection has always been where human transformation begins. There is an old story about a traveler who spends years searching for a wise master capable of revealing the meaning of life. After crossing mountains and deserts, enduring hunger and loneliness, he finally reaches the teacher's home. Exhausted, he asks for the secret. The master hands him a broom. Confused, the traveler waits for something profound. Instead, the teacher simply says, "Sweep the floor." At first the story feels disappointing, until you realize what it points toward. Wisdom was never meant to be downloaded. It had to be lived. Every generation rediscovers this lesson in a different form. Today's temptation isn't comfort alone. It's instant certainty. Artificial intelligence can summarize books you haven't read, gender opinions you haven't formed, decorate artwork you never learned to paint, write letters you never struggled to compose. Soon, it may become possible to move through entire days while making remarkably few original decisions. Life could become astonishingly efficient, but efficiency and meaning have never been the same thing. Some of the most meaningful moments in life are painfully inefficient. Falling in love, raising a child, learning forgiveness, creating something beautiful from nothing, watching the sunrise after a sleepless night, sitting beside someone who is grieving, with no perfect words to offer. None of these experiences can be optimized without losing something essential. They demand presence, not productivity. Perhaps that's why modern loneliness has become such a paradox. We have more ways to communicate than any generation before us. Yet millions describe feeling profoundly unseen. We are surrounded by information but starving for understanding. Connected constantly, yet often disconnected from ourselves. Algorithms excel at predicting behavior, but they cannot replace genuine presence. A friend doesn't matter because they correctly predict your next sentence. A loved one isn't valuable because they optimize your schedule. Human relationships become meaningful precisely because they remain unpredictable, because another person can surprise you, challenge you, reveal parts of yourself that no machine could calculate. That unpredictability is not a flaw. It is the heartbeat of every authentic relationship. Existential philosophers argued that isn't discovered waiting somewhere in the universe. It is created through choices. Not perfect choices, not guaranteed ones. Just deeply human ones. To choose is to risk failure, to love is to risk loss, to hope is to risk disappointment. Algorithms naturally reduce uncertainty. Life naturally produces it. And maybe that's why they will always exist in tension. One seeks optimization, the other asks for courage. Harari's warning begins to sound less like a prediction about technology, and more like a mirror held up to humanity. What kind of people are we becoming? If every difficult conversation can be delegated, if every decision can be predicted, if every curiosity can be satisfied instantly, will we still cultivate patience, humility, resilience? Or will those qualities slowly fade from lack of use, just as forgotten muscles weaken over time? The answer isn't obvious. History rarely offers certainty, but it does offer perspective. Human beings have survived ice ages, plagues, wars, empires, industrial revolutions, and countless inventions that transformed civilization. Every generation believed it was witnessing the end of something essential. Yet humanity endured because it adapted without completely abandoning what made it human. Perhaps that is our challenge now. Not rejecting technology, not fearing artificial intelligence, but refusing to surrender the inner work that no machine can perform for us. No algorithm can decide what kind of person you become after betrayal. No recommendation system can teach you integrity. No predictive model can